You're in the court. You can't handle the truth.
You have been convicted by a jury after a trial of one offence.
Your Honour, my client built his home by the law. Does he have the protection of the law?
Is that true or not?
I object.
Nothing further, Your Honour.
Silence in the court!
With 69% of Australian households owning a pet and around 40% of Australian marriages ending in separation or divorce, the stats quickly add up to show that many pets are implicated in relationship breakdowns every year. I'm Anna Swenson, Director and Principal Clerk of Swenson Barristers. For our latest episode of Brief Chats, I'm joined by family law barristers Nicholas Kanarev and Nicola Bowen to talk all things family law and pets. Up until recently, the courts had been pretty tough on how the beloved pet was viewed in the eyes of the law, and it wasn't always warm and fuzzy. Some significant new amendments might see a change to this. Let's take this topic for a walk around the park. Let's have a brief chat and talk about how family law deals with pets. Nicola and Nick, thank you so much for joining me today.
Happy to be here.
Thank you for having me.
Now, can I ask you before we get into this amazing topic to tell me just a little bit about your practice at the bar? We might start with you, Nicola.
I'm originally from Wales. I practiced in England and Wales. I was called to the Bar of England and Wales in 2001. Predominantly started off doing all criminal defence in a practice in London. I then transitioned more into family and immigration. I moved over here in 2013. Signed the bar roll over here in 2014, and since then I have practiced exclusively in family law with some child protection and intervention order proceedings to boot as well.
Wonderful. And Nick?
I signed the role of practitioner at the bar in November of 2000. So I've been around for about 25 years this year. And I predominantly do work in family law, but what constitutes the family? I would suggest that pets are also an extension of the family. And I got involved in animal welfare law through my family law practice. As a result, I am there for not only for mum and dad and the kids, but for Poochie as well.
Well, you're both very well placed to speak with me today, so thank you so much for coming along. Let's just start with a little bit of context. Nick, there are some very big amendments that we're going to talk about today, but up until this week, actually, how have pets been treated by the law?
They have been traditionally a form of property. Despite what people have thought, that they are members of the family, the court has said, no, they are property. They are an object, they are a thing that can be divided, but certainly can be given over to one party over another, as you would with other chattels such as perhaps artwork or valuable books or something like that.
So something that has had maybe an economic value that has been part of a property pool.
That's right.
Okay.
Exactly.
Now, I think setting the scene with pet ownership in Australia, I think this is some amazing stats to look at. Australia has the highest pet ownership rate across the world. So some recent statistics came in to say that there's an estimated 4.3 million pets in Victoria. 69% of Australian households have a pet. And then I think when you break that down, of the people who have a pet, I believe 72% have a dog. So the dog is predominantly sort of the family pet we have in the home. In terms of who owns the pets, by and large, it's families and it's couples. And I think you see this all over social media. It's the dog holding the engagement ring and the dog involved in the weddings and announcing babies. And, the dog is so synonymous with our life and embedded into the family unit, I think, even at just that level, let alone all the emotional attachments and, the humanisation we've given to pets. They even at the vet will have our surname. So the pet is very much embedded into the family life in Australia. But something that we've got to realise is that with all these families and couples who have pets, there is also a lot of relationships that break down, and that's where family law barristers come in. So,
Agreed.
Nicola, I thought maybe you could start by telling us sort of in your experience, have you seen a change in how pets have been more and more the focus in family law disputes of late?
I don't think so much of a change in focus from a legal perspective. When I practiced in England and Wales, ultimately pets were chattels. They were the same as the fridge and the sofa. And obviously, at the moment, it is akin to that in this jurisdiction as well. Realistically, people have always loved their pets and they will clearly continue to do so. But I think in the current climate, particularly since COVID, research into how animals have a positive impact on people's mental health. I think with regards to the importance about talking more openly in society about emotional well-being, I think the focus with regards to pets and companion animals, as they are now known, is changing and it is increasing in family law. We'll see an increase even further in relation to that. I think what we are seeing from a practical perspective in practice is people are more and more willing to make concessions within property proceedings on other issues in order to try and retain their pets in family law proceedings.
So the pet becomes really the key focus, and we'll give away the sofa, the fridge, the artwork if we get to keep the dog.
It can be a bargaining chip.
Yeah, which I'm sure we're going to unpack a little bit more soon. Nicola, have you seen some cases where the pet absolutely has been the centre of the dispute?
Absolutely. And I think just picking up on what Nick said, I mean, the last animal case that I did was about a year ago. When I first read the brief, I never knew that these animals would literally take over the entire set of proceedings. There were sheep in that case.
Sheep.
We went to a mediation.
Sheep?
Well, that was the debate.
Okay.
It wasn't a debate that we had on that occasion because obviously we didn't realise how relevant it would be going forward.
Right.
We prepared for a mediation. We turned up to the mediation. After about an hour and a half, the overall settlement with regards to percentage adjustment, who got the big ticket items, was absolutely sorted. So we were all looking forward to an early lunch.
Yeah.
We started drafting up the final orders, and all of a sudden we got to the ancillary part of how we split up the chattels. Mm-hmm. And all of a sudden, the husband on the other side put up his hand and said, "I want some of the sheep."
And that was a big deal breaker?
Things really kicked off from there.
No early lunch?
No early lunch. My client absolutely loved those sheep.
Okay.
She treated them as pets. She had named them after the cast of the singers in Pitch Perfect.
Oh.
She absolutely adored them.
That's special. Okay.
So ultimately, it turned into an extremely long day, but the husband knew full well how much she loved them. So ultimately, he was just doing it to antagonise her. He didn't even know what they were called.
Up until the amendments that came out this week, as we spoke about, pets have been known as property in the law. A key property case that involves an animal is that of Roxy the Spoodle.
Ah, yes.
Who would like to talk to me about Roxy's case?
I'll happily talk about Roxy's case. Roxy was a Spoodle, is that what it's called?
Yeah, Spoodle. Popular breed.
I understand that is a crossbreed dog. Roxy, the dog, was subject to some property proceedings. It went all the way to appeal, not just on the dog issue, over on other disputes with regards to the property. In relation to the dog issue, the court at first instance awarded the dog to the respondent, and that was very much on the basis of an emotional attachment, as opposed to who owned it, who paid for it, looking at it but far more from a financial perspective, if I could put it like that. Actually, in the judge at first instance dedicated 25 paragraphs in the judgment in the lower court to Roxy.
Oh,
so
wow.
I think, by the sounds of it, the judge was a animal lover, and I think the fact that they obviously went on to consider this emotional attachment, it's quite clear that they took Roxy's case very, very seriously.
So whilst they did look at that emotional attachment, they ultimately still decided that case with Roxy being a property item.
Absolutely. And even with the new amendments that come in, dogs and companion animals, as they know now, are still property. It's not switched into parenting cases, but certainly the criteria on how you decide what is justice and equity as who should get the companion animal under the new amendments, it's just got a far more broader criteria that you look at. So rather than financial contributions that we've got in the Roxy case, there is a bit more of a far broader criteria that will be looked at.
Have both of you found it really hard to explain to clients that the beloved pet is property?
Yes. Yes, me too. I find it even more difficult because I'm not an animal lover.
Okay. You're black and white on this. Objective viewer.
Clinical.
I don't have a pet.
Yeah.
I've never had a pet.
Yeah.
I don't particularly want a pet.
Okay.
So explaining to someone that ultimately is to them another child or their child is akin to their fridge or their sofa, it is extremely difficult. Then obviously going on to try and explain that if you are going to litigate this issue about your dog, the cost is totally disproportionate to the monetary value of your dog.
Yeah.
They obviously don't see it that way. So I do find it difficult.
To so many people, the cost of that puppy is a distant memory and doesn't matter.
Absolutely.
It's about the love they have for the dog.
Absolutely.
Now.
But certainly on the Roxy case on appeal, it went back to the basics. It was ultimately looked at from a legal ownership and financial perspective. And Roxy then on appeal went back to the appellant because the dog was registered in her name and she paid for it, even though the emotional attachment and connection was clearly on the respondent.
Interesting. Okay. Nicola, there's another case of Arena, which I think is really important to talk about at this time as well. Can you walk us through that one?
Sure. That's ultimately the case that challenged Roxy's case,
Okay.
if I could put it like that. The father in that matter, it was parenting proceedings, challenged the finding that pets do not form part of parenting cases. Now, in that case, the father said that once the dog had been awarded to the mother in property proceedings, there were concurrent parenting proceedings where the child lived with the mother but spent time with the father. What the father wanted was an order under parenting orders that the dog accompanied the child with the spend time arrangements when they spend time with the father. His rationale for that was on two bases. The child had special needs and the father said it was integral in assisting him with his special needs, and ultimately it helped him regulate his behaviours. And on that basis, he felt that the dog contributed to the parenting process, and it was ultimately that, he says, that invoked the jurisdiction of the court to make parenting orders.
And so what did the court decide?
The court didn't agree with him, relied on Roxy's case and made it blatantly clear that they didn't agree with the father, and ultimately they affirmed the decision that was given in Roxy's case, and that is, of course, that animals are property and are not part of parenting cases. The judge went even further to say even if there was jurisdiction in relation to that to make parenting orders, he would still have dismissed the father's application. There was an extremely conflictual relationship between the parents, and the judge's concern was that if this dog was to accompany the child every single time, that could increase the conflict to the parents. So any benefit to the child would have been outweighed by the increase of that conflict.
I was going to say, it also implies from the father's perspective that he needed the dog to co-parent the children.
Yeah, the child plus one.
Yes.
And so the court just said, no, we're not actually going to
That's
accept
right.
that and move on. And again, I think it's interesting to note that just because the courts have made decisions like this, it doesn't mean that that can't happen in private arrangements where people have agreed to it. It's just how the court has decided these matters.
Absolutely. I mean, that case of Arena, even in light of the new amendments, that hasn't in any way changed the decision that was in Arena in any event, because obviously that is specifically in relation to parenting. But when we look back at or certainly look at the new legislation, we are still entirely focused on property orders.
When we talk about that, these amendments in a moment, we'll really talk about that custody part and how that's not being changed in relation to pets. But I want to touch on the manipulation that can happen in family law disputes that surround the pet, because I think these can be really unfortunate but really important things to appreciate in the why as to, you know, what motivated these amendments. Nick, could you talk to us about some of these cases where, you know, the courts have seen some really awful instances of manipulation through pets?
Pets can be weaponised. An easy situation whereby a person A can have a very strong attachment to a dog, for example, and dogs are very, if you like, human intuitive. They pick up sensitivities. If a person is upset, often a dog will come up and try and comfort you. And people really relate to that. Aha, might say the other person, I know this. I am going to go, I want, let's say, I want a car, a piece of artwork or something, but I'm going to use the dog as the leverage by which I can get those other things that I want, knowing full well that there is this attachment to this pet. Let's call it a dog. I had one situation where it was one of those small, fluffy corgi types, but it was white, and the wife just adored this dog. They didn't have children, but they certainly had this dog. And
The fur baby.
A fur baby, exactly. And she was in tears begging him in front of us when we had this sort of conference to keep the dog. He just stepped back, walked out of the room, came back. She got more and more upset. He says, yes, I will if I can have a certain amount of furniture. She said, you can have whatever you like.
Whatever you want, I just want the dog.
Exactly right. And so in that sense, he knew how to play his former partner, walks out of the room, let her get heated up, upset emotionally. She was almost to the point of being sick because she was so attached. The one thing she wanted to retain is that sense of happiness, that sense of attachment.
There's, of course, that extra layer when the kids are attached to the family pet, and we have unfortunately seen cases come through the courts where the pet's been weaponised against the children for a particular outcome. Are there some key examples that you could walk us through?
Yeah, there is. The case of Bruin, that was a parenting dispute. There were initially parenting orders made by consent in around about 2016, along with property orders, where the children were to live with the mother and spend time with the father. There was significant concern around the mother with regards to her mental health and drug use. And as a result of that, the department came in and removed the children, placed the children with the father. The mother then moved to another city and took the children's pets with her.
Right.
The matter then took about another 2 years to go through the court process and reach a final hearing. And it was only at the door of the final hearing that the mother agreed by consent to return the children's animals to them because they were still residing with the father. That is notwithstanding the fact that it was quite clear on the evidence and the mother's own case that the animals ultimately assisted the children with their anxieties. The children had been interviewed by the family report writer. That reporter identified that the children worried about their animals. The mother knew that the children worried about their animals. They were so worried at one point they thought the animals were dead. All they wanted for Christmas were their animals back.
To be reunited.
And their pets to be back with them. So it was only at the trial door that ultimately the mother agreed for those animals to go back. That was amongst a plethora of other things, a significant concern for the judge. And even though she, of course, couldn't have ordered the animals to go back and live with the father and the children, had the mother not consented to do it at the trial door, she was extremely concerned that ultimately the mother was putting her own needs above the children in relation to that. And she was using them as emotional leverage in order to try and get those children back in her care.
To move to the other city.
Correct.
To say, if I've got the dog, the kids are going to want to be here.
Absolutely. And in amongst, it was a risk case. It was an unacceptable risk case. And ultimately, the finding of the court was that mum was an unacceptable risk to the extent that the children could not spend unsupervised time with her.
Yeah. See, I just find those such sad cases to hear about where the dog's really been implicated into the mix of, or the pet's implicated into the mix of a really hard-fought dispute, which ultimately it's for the parents, but the dog is in that.
Absolutely. But I think the identification from the judge's point of view in that perspective is this wasn't a fight so much between the parents by this stage. The mother was acutely aware of how important those animals were to the children. But even knowing that, she voluntarily kept them and just continued basically escalating their distress.
So I think the distress of the kids in that example, plus the evolving way that we now have pets in our families in Australia, as you know, evidenced by some of the statistics I was talking about earlier, I think it's time, now that we've sort of appreciated where we've come from and the pillars that have sort of set up how the law has dealt with pets to date, to talk about the new amendments that have come into family law proceedings. So, Nicola, do you want to tell us a little bit about what those amendments are and how this works?
Animals now have got their own subsection in the Family Law Act. There was an amendment bill that was obviously passed last year. Those amendments came in, and there is now a specific subsection for pets or companion animals, as they're called, in the Family Law Act under Section 79. Animals in the context of property proceedings. We haven't gone into the realms of parenting orders, but ultimately now there is a definition of what is called a companion animal. and a set of orders of what the court can do and orders that they can make in relation to that companion animal. There are 3 things the court can do. They can order ownership to either of the parties involved in proceedings. They can also give ownership of that companion animal to a third party, but that third party's got to consent.
Right.
Or finally, they can make an order that that companion animal is sold. But what is blatantly clear is those orders can be made on an interim or a final basis, and it is restricted to those 3 orders as to what a court can do with them.
Right. So it's really set out
It is.
a prescriptive
Correct.
set of guidelines that the court has to consider now in looking at companion animals?
Absolutely. It seems to be a 3-stage process. Ultimately, first of all, you've got to identify whether the animal in question fits the definition of what is a companion animal.
Okay.
It doesn't give an exhaustive definition of what a companion animal is, but according to the explanatory memorandum that came along with the bill, a companion animal, and the word companion, has got to be given its own natural meaning. So I think from everyone's perspective, I think we can safely say that pets are included in that.
Absolutely.
They do then go on to give a exclusion list, if I could put it like that, as what are not companion animals. They include assistance animals, animals kept as part of a business, agricultural purposes, and animals kept for the use in laboratory tests or experiments. But as long as you fit within the definition and criteria of what a companion animal is, the court can then go on to make those 3 orders.
So what is a companion animal might now be the next thing that gets unpacked by the court. So Nick, in Nicola's example of the sheep case,
Yes.
which is how would the court approach that one? Is that a companion animal or is that an agricultural animal?
Well, that's a key issue. Can a rat be a companion animal? Can a snake be a companion animal? Short answer is yes. The issue is the relationship the animal has with the person and the person has with the animal. They'd have a name. They would also have some sort of special quality that elicits an emotional response. The whole idea is the nature of companionship, that relationship that has been formed between the human and the animal. And it doesn't have to be 2-way, it can be 1-way. Reptiles, you don't think of them as 2-way affectionate, but it gives me, the owner, pleasure because I am able to relate to this because the world hates snakes, but I understand snakes. There's that special connection that I have with the snake, all right? It makes it more human that way.
One other thing that came to mind with me is horses, because a horse, I think, is an animal where people can have a very strong bond and it can be akin to a pet. But then also in looking at how that animal could be defined by the courts, maybe it could be a business animal, maybe it could be an agricultural animal. What are your thoughts on horses?
It's how the horse is treated. I know that sounds perhaps very vague, but if you've got a horse that's there to round up cattle and sheep, it's a working horse. But if it's there for kids to ride around paddocks, it is no different to having a pet dog and you go out with a walk with the dog, except you just ride the horse. Horses, like dogs, they know who you are, and if it's feeding time, they will run to you, just like the dog. They have, in many ways, many characteristics of a dog, and in my mind, there's no reason, depending on the circumstances, why a horse couldn't be described as a companion animal.
So Nick's team, horses companion animal. Nicola, what do you think?
Horses have got the potential to be one of the most controversial animals under the definition of a companion animal.
Okay.
I mean, they can be extremely expensive, so I think that's going to factor in to a certain extent. But I mean, look, a horse, and we've got to look at it from, you've got 2 parties which may have entirely different perspectives on a companion animal, whether it be a horse or whether it be a dog. You may have to someone an agricultural working animal like a horse, so they say, well, it's not included as a companion animal, when on the other side, the other party is saying, well, you might use it in your agriculture, but when you're not working it, I'm using it as my pet.
I could think of that as the sheepdog.
Absolutely.
Out working all day and then
Absolutely.
sitting at someone's feet at the fireside at night.
I don't think it is just restricted to dogs at all, but I think this whole definition of what a companion animal is when you've got competing applications and different aspects coming from different parties, it's going to be very interesting to see which way the court falls with them.
Absolutely.
Hence, animal behaviourists come into this.
So if we've got a companion animal and we're before the courts, how does the court now decide who gets the companion animal? Nicola, did you want to start off with that one?
Yep, there are 8 specific criteria, again, in the legislative provisions that the court are going to follow. It is looking at the financial contributions that the parties made in relation to the animal. It is non-financial contributions, and by that, it brings in the word specifically attachment. It can be an attachment to the parties themselves or a child to the party to proceedings.
With that one, does this mean we're going to see court cases where we're proving how much the dog loves one party over another?
Yes.
Do you envisage we're unpacking text messages and videos? What does that mean for the courts?
I think there's going to be a lot of emotion in it.
Yeah.
Because realistically, if you look at the criteria that the court have put forward, albeit it is in regards to a property order,
yes,
there is absolutely a strong emotional element within that criteria. So that the minute they have entered in the words attachment to either party or to a child of the party, I think that is giving it a far more emotive and far broader perspective, rather than just saying, yes, they are still chattels, but they're chattels with a bit of something special in it.
Yeah.
And I can envisage a media element in it as well, where someone will take a vision of, with the dog, sit, lie, let's go over here, jump, see what my relationship was like. You can actually pack into a video your relationship with the dog. You can't do that with children, of course, but you can do that with animals.
So I'd have never thought to do that.
Yeah.
But maybe you attach that to an affidavit.
Yeah.
Why not?
Video attachment. What else is in the criteria?
The other thing, and probably the third element that needs highlighting, is family violence. That is specifically addressed as well. Again, that is twofold. It is any violence or threat of violence that a party has made directly towards the animal.
Okay.
And there is also an element of what family violence has occurred between the parties. So again, that's giving the court an extremely broad discretion in relation to that criteria to cover all forms of family violence, because obviously that animal by the perpetrator could have been used as a weapon to commit family violence to the other party. So we're looking at both direct and indirect family violence through that companion animal.
The other thing that might be in terms of evidentiary support for one party over another is, for example, we've got, with children, we've got child impact reports, we've got family reports. I can see that happening with animals where you get...
Oh, really? Expert vet reports?
Absolutely.
Particularly because of the word attachment.
We're going to be assessing
Potentially.
the pet.
Animal behaviourists are going to have a new area in the family court for pets.
Ooh, marketing opportunity for our listeners.
You bet.
And so with those criteria, what do we envisage the court's going to be looking at in making those assessments?
I would have thought, bearing in mind the rationale behind why this has been now put in legislation and the expansion as to what criteria needs to be looked at, my view, and obviously we'll have to see the way the courts look at it, I don't think there is going to be so much of an emphasis on who paid for it, whose name it's in, who's got the registration in relation to it. I think it is going to be far more geared and focused to is who looks after it on a day-to-day basis, where the children are at in all of this. I think those, albeit under the legislation, it doesn't specify whether any of the criteria should hold more weight than others. But I think certainly bearing in mind there's family violence and that non-financial consideration as well, I think there is going to be a sway far more in relation to those two criteria rather than ultimately who just paid for it.
I think this will be a really interesting space to watch, because I think there'll be some critical cases that come out that sort of demonstrate how this is going to be used and assessed. There was one thing I want to talk about in these amendments that isn't there, and that is criteria or direction around custody disputes to do with pets. Specifically, we're still considering them as property as far as I am reading. Nick, can you talk to me about your observations on that?
This is very important. There's going to be one party that's going to be happy and another party that's going to be disappointed. All property rights will be invested in one party over another. And reason for that is there is nothing worse than having to come back to court because one party has overheld the pet when he or she should have returned it by a certain time at a certain place. And then you have to work out where's changeover going to be. You can see the humanisation or the way in which children are transferred from one party to another. We don't want to go down that path. We don't want to work out, you've overheld the pet. We don't know where we're going to sort of have changeover. You weren't there at the specific time. And that is a headache the family court doesn't need.
So the court's saying we are not going to make an order that says meet me at the dog park at 5 o'clock on a Sunday and you take the dog home and then I meet you in 2 weeks back here for changeover.
You didn't pay a vet bill. You didn't groom the dog. The dog was hungry. All those sort of things that you can expect. I'm the better custodian. You have failed and I'm now bringing you back to court because of the abuse. You're actually abusing me by abusing the dog. It's just another level of heartache and headache that the court doesn't need.
One of the rationales behind property orders is that obviously there is finality with regards to finances between the parties as much as possible on final property orders. I think if we did have this shared custody, not only are we looking at the problems that Nick is raising, is it a week about arrangement? Is it alternate weekends and half school holidays with the dog and everything else that comes with parenting orders?
Yeah.
We've also then got the financial perspective of someone's got to then jointly maintain this dog. So like child support, are we going to have dog support? Who's paying for it? It's not severing the financial relationship between parties, which is obviously one of the rationales behind final property orders. So I think that's got something to do with it as well.
But privately with law firms and binding agreements, people could make arrangements to do with the family pet
Absolutely,
if they
they
wanted to. It's just that the court won't order
Correct.
this. Right. Why do you think the court's opted not to go into that? Do you think it's just too messy, it's too hard, too difficult?
It's opening Pandora's box.
Yeah, okay.
There are far too many twists and turns and the court is jammed enough with humans without bringing an element of the pet. And we don't want to have a special pets court like we have children's court. We don't want to go down that path.
Wow, that would be a whole other world, wouldn't it?
And I think with parenting orders, when we're looking at what is in the children's best interest, if there is another issue or conflict between the parents with regards to an animal, all that's obviously doing is having a detrimental impact, arguably, on these children. It is another issue to sort out between them and another thing that can adversely impact on these children.
How do you feel about these reforms? What's your initial reaction to them coming out and how do you think it'll play out?
Oh, I welcome it because it's going to be more work for family lawyers. That's not being cynical because now we actually have a species of property and it's a species in its own right and it means people can then fight for what is an emotional attachment that they have. They previously were simply looking at that as just another piece of property, but this is not. This has a name and unlike inanimate property, it's breathing, it's living, it's able to be related to. And in that sense, I think it will either stop in its tracks issues of pets or in some cases it will enhance and increase the volatility between the parties until it's resolved.
Is there anything more you would have liked to have seen in these amendments, Nicola?
No. I think leaving it at property as opposed to parenting, I think at the moment sits as a good balance. I absolutely welcome them because the reality is when I am having conversation with clients, obviously pre-amendments, it literally is a financial consideration. Did you pay for it? It's not in your name. It's over, so to speak. At least now I can understand and say to a client how important, not that I didn't say it before, but obviously how important from a legal perspective that emotional attachment is.
Yeah.
And obviously get those instructions from them and be able to run that case for them properly in court.
And I suppose it creates a bit of a framework for a structured discussion around where you think the dog or the pet is going to land, because the courts actually set out what will be considered in where the dog's going to go.
It gives you a sense of certainty, whereas before it was a different kind of certainty. It was all to do ownership, claim. Here, well, you may have done all that, but look at the children. They're with me, the dog, and etc. So it gives you a different sense of certainty that in some ways the dog has a voice or the pet has a voice.
It really does, because it's taking into account where that connection lies, not just for what it means to the family members, but also to the family pet who, you know, in many of these cases I think will be thought of as a family member. You know, it obviously is a property category, but it's giving a lot more, I think, emotional value to that animal.
But we don't, at this stage, we have independent children's lawyers, but we don't have independent pet lawyers.
Oh, wow. That could be a whole nother time to specialise, team. Put it in your Vic Bar profile, specialist in interpretation of dogs' needs and wants. Well, this has been such a fantastic chat. Thank you so much for joining me to talk about pets in family law.
Thank you.
Thank you indeed.
Silence in the court.
The information shared on this podcast is for general informational purposes only and is not intended to be advice of any kind. While we strive to provide accurate and up-to-date content, we make no guarantees or warranties about the completeness, reliability, or accuracy of the information presented. Any opinions expressed by guests on this podcast are their own and do not necessarily reflect the views or opinions of the podcast host or production team. The inclusion of any resources, links, or references does not constitute an endorsement or recommendation by the podcast. Listeners are encouraged to seek professional advice specific to their own situation before making decisions or taking action based on the content of this podcast. Neither the podcast host, producer, nor any associated parties will be held liable for any losses, damages, or harm resulting from reliance on the information provided. By listening to this podcast, you agree to this disclaimer and accept that you are responsible for your own actions and decisions.